Welcome to the section of BD Playbook where we talk about how to effectively execute your pitch. Now, at this point, you should have a well-designed deck and script that conveys your value proposition, disarms concerns, contains stories, sprinkles in questions, has strategic pauses, and provides clear next steps. Now it's time to actually pitch your prospect. But before you actually pitch them, there's a few things you should do before you get on the phone with them. Number one, answer this question. At this point, what is the best possible outcome of this call? Literally write it out. And the reason that this is important to answer is because at different stages, there is going to be different next steps. And you need to be totally aware that at this stage, is the best outcome another meeting with potentially the decision maker? Is it to close the deal? Understanding exactly where you need to get to will help you navigate the conversation. And if you don't really have this intent focus on the realistic best possible outcome, you're just not going to be as intentional about your actions. So literally write this out before the call, what the best possible outcome of it could be. This will bring a whole lot of focus to your dialogue, especially towards the end when you're trying to push somebody towards a certain action. In addition to defining your ideal outcome of the call, you also want to do some reconnaissance on both the company and prospect you're about to talk to. First place to go is Google News. You want to search the name of the company you're about to talk to in Google News. And if you're not familiar with Google News, it's basically a facet of Google search that allows you to surface the most recent content produced on the internet about a particular keyword. So in this instance, I searched Salesforce, and you'll see in the results the most recent news articles on Salesforce. Why this is important is because if an important event just happened that's related to that company, you might want to be aware of this and also bring it up in conversation. If something awesome just happened to them, it's always good to demonstrate that you're aware of that in the initial rapport building stage of the pitch, because it shows that you're aware of what's going on in the industry and also that you care about the success of that company. Another place you're going to want to check out is Twitter, and you're going to want to try to look at both the company handle as well as the stakeholders handle. Oftentimes, companies will publish things on their blog or even just on their social media channels about great things that are going on at the company. So this is an excellent place, in addition to Google News, to find those things. It's also cool to see what's going on in your stakeholder's life. So if you can find this particular person, look at their handle and see what they're talking about. This can kind of give you some more interest on what they're interested in, what's going on in their life, maybe even additional company news. Now, if you're not familiar with Twitter, a place that you can find this information is just going to twitter.com/search. And you can even do an advanced search to isolate your prospect. So in all these word sections, you could type in the prospect's name, and then you could isolate that person by going to the places section and searching for the particular area where the company is headquartered. And this is just a very simple way to find your prospect's handle and, again, see what that person's talking about, what they're interested in, and then loop these conversational threads into the rapport building stage of the pitch. Okay, you want to go to the company's website or blog. Now, again, it's very much along the same lines, but you just want to see what's going on with the company. See if there's anything new published on the blog. Maybe there's an interesting product release. Maybe there's just pictures of the team doing something cool. Whatever it is, you're looking for ammunition to effectively educate you and better understand the product before you get on the phone with the person you're about to talk to. The more knowledgeable you can seem about their company and current in terms of what is going on and what they're up to, the better conversation you're going to have. And if you look informed, it's only going to help your cause in landing a deal. The last place I like to go prior to a pitch is a prospect's LinkedIn. And again, here I'm looking for just some history on the prospect, which can be used as touch points for rapport building. So things like the previous companies they worked at, maybe what they were particularly responsible for, both at their current company as well as their previous companies, the school they went to. Another thing that I'll do that's a little bit less obvious is checking out the interest section of that prospect. So a lot of times they have their professional interests, but also their personal interests. And this is an excellent place to mine for opportunities to connect around interests. So for example, this person is interested in running. And one thing that you can do to build some rapport is basically inject dialogue around their interests without explicitly stating that you're aware of them. So if you have a true mutual interest in something that you noticed in their profile, for example, running, and they asked you, how's everything in New York? You might say something like, yeah, things are good, but I just started running again, and my heels are killing me, or my Achilles is bothering me a little bit. And now all of a sudden you're seeding a conversation around something that they care about, which is excellent for rapport building. Now, when you make statements like this, you only want to do them with complete honesty. You don't want to just say things simply to start building rapport if they're not true. But again, this is an excellent place where you can find these conversational threads and weave them into the rapport building stage to get somebody talking about things that they actually care about. Cool. So let's talk about a typical first call agenda. And we've talked about this a little bit before, but we'll just review it again. Starting off, some rapport building questions, light banner, then going into 1 to 2 more relevant business questions. And these questions will depend basically on how well informed somebody is about your company. After that, you're going to walk through the deck using your script as a guideline. And then you're going to go into the closing discussion portion of the pitch, followed by next steps. So let's talk about during the pitch what you should be doing, because you shouldn't just be going off on a monologue. It's critical that you're gathering information about the prospect. And again, the reason is the more information you have, the better understanding you're going to have of a prospect's pains and needs, which will allow you to frame and position your relationship effectively. I use a Google Doc called My Working Agenda to take notes on this information. And very simply, it's just a running Google Doc of the person's name, company, the date that I talked to them, where I just take all my notes. Anytime I need to recall notes from this document or from a meeting, I simply just use the Control F find function to basically search the prospect's name. I pull up the last meeting and I have all my notes on that particular prospect. This is super simple. It works for me. A lot of people take notes in a sales tracking or prospect tracking software. I prefer this just because it's easier and it gives me more room to take notes on a prospect. But whatever works for you, so long as you have a system that allows you to capture the important information from the conversation. Let's talk about what notes you should be taking. First and foremost, you want to be writing down anything that's potentially relevant to your relationship with that prospect. So things like high-level information on the company that could be relevant, the objectives of both the company as well as the individual. Remember, you want to have a keen understanding of how your prospect is measured, what they're trying to accomplish, because if you understand this, you can appeal to their incentives. You also want to understand what their current situation is relevant to the relationship. So is there an incumbent software? Have they been thinking about this but haven't yet acted on it? Do they have the resources for this right now, both financially and or from a development standpoint? You want to try to basically understand all these things and then take diligent notes about them so that when you ask yourself, okay, how do I best position this? Where am I at? How can I achieve some leverage? You have all this information in front of you to properly architect the pitch moving forward. Another area you should be taking notes on is the prospect's personal life. So do they have a family? What are their interests? Do they have a favorite sports team? What did they do last weekend? Do they like to travel? What are their favorite places? This information is excellent for rapport building, but it's also ammo that can be used in conversational continuity. So a lot of times people they won't get back to you if you're constantly pinging them about a deal. But if you bring up things in your email dialogues completely unrelated to the deal, like news on something they care about, maybe it's their sports team just had a game and they won, or something's going on in their city, people often are more likely to respond. And again, a lot of times it's just about keeping that dialogue warm outside of things specifically related to the business deal that allows them to be open, honest, and forthcoming about where things stand, especially when things are not ideal for you. So if the deal is stalled, things are taking longer than expected, people aren't really excited to talk about that. However, if you have a dialogue going around something else that they care about, there's a certain level of comfort that's developed there, which will allow people to be more comfortable and open with sharing with you things that might not make you happy. We're going to go over conversational continuity and strategies for that in a little bit, but that's just one thing to keep in mind as we talk about this. So one thing we haven't really mentioned is bringing up the price if your relationship is a monetary one. There's a couple of effective ways to do this, and just certain things that you can do to avoid things like price haggling. So first and foremost, you want to introduce the price, if there is one, at the end, and after you've outlined all the positive reasons why somebody would want to work with you. You want to do this because you don't want somebody thinking about the cost-benefit analysis until they've understood all the benefits. It's ideal to build a state of excitement and anticipation before you introduce how much it's going to cost somebody. Another favorite thing of mine to do when bringing up the price is framing it as only. So I might say something like, you'll receive everything I just showed you for only $495 a seat, or whatever the price unit is that you're talking about. And the reason that this is powerful is that basically you're injecting the fact that collectively people think that this is cheap. When you say something like only, that's indicating that everybody else thinks that this is a steal. And people naturally feel inclined to agree with the collective masses. So when you say something like, oh yeah, for only $495 a seat, all of a sudden that appears cheaper and like a better deal than just $495, at least initially without the in-depth analysis of cost benefit. Let's talk about some ways to avoid price haggling. First thing you can do is explicitly state why your product costs the amount it does. When you give an explicit reason why, it justifies the price and also makes it seem less malleable. So a statement that demonstrates this is, today it costs $495 per enterprise seat. We only charge just a little bit more than $1 a day per seat just because we need to cover our own costs. Again, I've set the frame with the word only here because nobody wants to look like a poor cheapskate if everybody else thinks that that is a deal. And I've talked about why it costs how much it does because we need to cover our costs. This justifies the price and makes it seem like it's less malleable, which will prevent somebody from trying to haggle with you. Another thing that you can do to avoid price haggling is explicitly indicating that you don't move on price, or just simply saying that it's only going to go up. So an example statement that accomplishes this is, today you can have all this for only $495. Just to be transparent, I can't make any guarantees that it's going to stay there for much longer, but I can assure you that it's not going any lower. This just sets the expectation that you're not going to move down on price. And being firm in this just a lot of times cuts through people's proclivities to even ask, because you've set the expectation that, hey, if anything, this price is going to go up. Now, what if the relationship you propose is free? Is there anything that you can do to make this person feel like they're getting a deal? The answer is absolutely. My favorite way to accomplish this is basically to indicate that other people see so much value in what you're proposing that they typically want to pay for it. So a statement like this accomplishes that. After this presentation is usually when people ask me how much this costs. The best part about this is that you get all of this for free. And then I'll pause, right? And I'll exercise silence there to coax confirmation that this is an amazing deal. And people will typically say, yes, it is, because again, I've indicated that that's what other people think. And there is a natural proclivity of people that you pitch to follow the herd mentality. Okay, so this is how you can make something that's free look even more valuable. Let's talk about closing the first pitch. Well, how you end the pitch should always be calibrated with how the conversations went. The reason that you don't want to ask this is because very few people possess the authenticity and honesty to admit that they don't hold power. So what that means is that A, people will say that they are the decision maker when they're truly not. And also, if they're not the decision maker, it just puts an awkward frame on the conversation. Oh no, I actually don't hold the power to make any decisions at my company. That person is XYZ. So generally, this direct of a statement is just not the most effective way to derive this information. Let's talk about a better approach, or a few better approaches rather. You might say something like, so when decisions like this are typically made, who all gets involved? What is a typical process for deciding on an offering like this? So who else on your team would be interested in learning about this? All of these are more direct ways to find out who is involved in the decision-making process and what that is, and then make sure to get a meeting with that person. Again, because you want to be dealing with people that actually can move the needle on a relationship. So if it turns out that that person actually is the decision maker, the next thing you want to do is reaffirm or outline the proposed next steps if you haven't already. So the way that I like to do this is say something like, great, the next steps are very easy. I'm going to send you a very straightforward boilerplate agreement, assuming that this is the next steps, that states the terms of the proposed relationship. By X date, we're going to provide you with this, and in return, you guys are going to do this for us. Obviously, there'll be some standard legalese and conditional clauses that our lawyers will throw in just to protect ourselves, but at a high level, this is what we're looking at. Does all this sound good? So this is just an example statement that you could use if, let's say, you do want to go into next steps, but you don't have a productized relationship that already has an established agreement and terms of service. And typically, where you would go from here is, if they say, yeah, that sounds great, is go to your lawyer, outline the specific terms of the agreement that you proposed, and then ask them to draft up a formal agreement. You can also do things like ask for a signed letter of intent to work with you if you haven't done this, just to get some type of commitment. The list goes on, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in the terms and negotiation section of BD Playbook. Now, one thing you do want to make sure you include in this agreement that your lawyer drafts up is if-then conditions. So, for example, if the deliverable, whatever that is that they're going to provide you, is not met on this date, this bad action will happen. And what you want to do with these is basically just protect yourself as well as get them to put skin in the game. If they don't have any reason to act with urgency, these things can drag on forever, which prevents you from ultimately actualizing the relationship, which is what you're actually going for, not just the signed contract. You want the implementation, the resale, the email partnership, the remarketing, whatever it is that is actually going to drive growth, not just a piece of paper that says two companies are working together. Now, what happens if they're not the decision maker? What do you do? Well, you don't want to waste too much time on somebody who doesn't possess the ability to push a relationship forward. So that's why I need to get in front of the decision maker as soon as possible. And if you recall these questions that we brought up earlier, when you ask something like, so when decisions like this are typically made, who all gets involved? And they get back to you and say that somebody else is, your number one priority is to get in front of that person. What typically happens is often this person is a gatekeeper, this initial stakeholder who is not the decision maker. And they'll propose that they need to go and pitch internally. So maybe they'll say something like, I'll need to have him take a final look at this before we go any further. You cannot let them pitch internally. You need to basically get in front of that. And the reason is that no one is going to be able to pitch your product as effectively as you can, or your relationship as effectively as you can, that's just heard about it for 20 minutes. They're not going to be able to answer rebuttals. They're not going to be able to present it and all the benefits as clearly and concisely, which is why you want to make sure that you are the one that's pitching the product. So you want to say something like this. Great, so how about both of us hop on a call next week? I have my calendar open. Is Tuesday or Wednesday good for you guys? So once that person indicates the name of the person who is the decision maker, propose a call immediately with that person, with both of you. Now, you'll get a common bite back. Actually, I'll need to reconvene with them first and get back to you. Again, a lot of times they're the gatekeeper. They want to protect that person. Here's one way how to intercept and handle that. I totally understand, but I just imagine that they're probably going to have some questions. I'd be happy to make your life a little bit easier and have all three of us hop on a quick call next week. That way, if they have any questions, I can answer them right there so we avoid a lengthy back and forth. Does that make sense? And what you do here is basically incentivize them to allow you to be the one to deliver the pitch. And you do that by just alluding to the fact that their life is going to be easier if you are the one to present it, just because that way you can answer all the questions they have, you can avoid the lengthy back and forth. And instead of saying, does that sound good, or how about that, I say, does that make sense? And the reason that I say that is because, truthfully, when positioned like this does make a whole lot more sense. So you want to ask a question that somebody will comply to, given the pre-context, and the does that make sense is more likely to get a yes than does that sound good? Okay. If they still refrain at this point, you need to get a commitment that they will keep an open dialogue. And this is where many conversations die, because the initial stakeholder goes in, they pitch the offering, the decision maker doesn't like it, and then you never hear from them again. So you need to basically protect yourself from this happening if they won't let you intercept and get on a call, all three of you, in the next week, by just getting some commitment from them to keep an open dialogue. So here's how you accomplish this: by levering consistency. Whether you know it or not, humans naturally desire to be consistent with what they say and how they act. So if I say that I'm going to do something to somebody else, I'm going to be more likely to do that action because I want to be consistent between what I said I was going to do and what I actually do. It's just a sign of integrity that we all strive for. So you can take advantage of this in your conversations. Here's an example of how to do this. Sure, that's fine. I totally understand that you need to talk to your boss first. Can you do me a favor? Would you mind sending me an email with their feedback after you guys have had a discussion, just so we're all on the same page about whether there's a good fit here? I'd really appreciate it. At this point, that person will say, sure. Now, what you've done here is basically gotten a commitment from this person to keep the dialogue open regardless of how it goes. Again, you asked for feedback and they said, yeah, sure, I'll give you feedback. Now, what you want to do is seal this in a concrete way with this email. And this is something, the reason that this is important is because you need to be able to recall this instance where they made this commitment with this person in case they don't get back to you. This is very, very important because a lot of times people will make this commitment and then they won't remember it, that they won't remember the fact that they said it 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, whatever it is. So you can accomplish this by saying, after saying in an email, after you've had the phone call, and the person is committed to this verbally, hey, great connecting with you today about XYZ. I enjoyed learning about your product, and small world that you also love Rio de Janeiro. I really appreciate you offering to email me some feedback once you have a chance to talk to your team this week. It means a lot. I look forward to hearing from you then. So what you've done here is cited the fact that they made that commitment. And what happens is, if they don't respond to you as promised in a week or whenever they said they were going to check with their boss, you reply to this email that we just displayed in the last slide asking for an update. And what they'll see is that indication and reminder that they made a commitment to get back to you with feedback. And again, there is a lot of incentive here and natural psychological principles at play because this person desires to be consistent with their word and what they said they were going to do. So an example reply email that you could send is, hey, any chance you've gotten some feedback from your team yet? Any insight here, even if it's not the best fit right now, would be much appreciated. Now, the first sentence is basically referencing the feedback they promised to give you, and the second instance is giving them permission to deliver negative news. This is important because people are afraid of confrontation, and saying that I don't want to work with you or that my team's not interested is an example of a potential confrontational situation. So a statement like, any insight here, even if it's not the best fit right now, it would be much appreciated, basically gives them permission to give bad news. And you want this permission because the last place you want to be is ambiguity. It's much better to get to a resolution and understand whether there's a chance of a deal moving forward or not moving forward, so you can spend time on relationships that actually have a chance of being actualized.